You're listening to All In. This is the podcast dedicated to helping you fulfill the mission of God in your life and around the world. I'm your host, Jeff Rupert. Hey everybody, welcome to this week's episode of All In. This is the podcast dedicated to helping you live out the mission of God in your life and around the world. Hey, don't forget to subscribe to the podcast in iTunes or whatever is your favorite podcast app, and tell your friends about it. Share it on Facebook, Twitter, whatever helps you. If this helps you, use it to help others. This week, I've got with me on the Skype line, coming all the way from the United Kingdom, two dear friends of mine, Paul and Fran. They are pastors of the Destiny Foursquare Church in Guildford, which is southwest of London. And I first met Paul and Fran. Fran, I don't know if you'll remember this, but we were at a Foursquare Great Britain pastors conference. My wife Debbie was with me, and she had a travel disaster.
Oh, yes.
If you remember, she had a disaster. She had lost her hairdryer. And as you know, for the ladies, that is a catastrophe when you are about to go be a guest at a public conference. And our first encounter with you showed your heart. You went immediately into action. I don't know if you gave Debbie your dryer, or if you went down to a market somewhere and bought one. I don't remember exactly what happened. I just know that within a short amount of time, the disaster was fixed. And so since that time, you've had a warm place in Debbie's heart for sure. You bailed her out big time. Well, then when I got to know you guys on a ministry level, and a more personal level, it was when our good friend, mutual friend Ken Baird, who is the national leader of Foursquare Great Britain, used to always brag about you guys and tell me what a wonderful job you're doing. It was just so delightful. And so eventually I got tired of hearing Ken brag about you, and I decided to go see it for myself. And so one Sunday afternoon, Ken and I drove there to your house, and I walked in the door not knowing what to expect. Walk into your house, and I tell you, my life was profoundly impacted that day. And what is so amazing about it to me is what you guys do, really anybody can do. If you have a house and you can cook food and you can invite people, you can actually touch the world. And that's exactly what I saw happening there that day. That day I met people from China, I think we had people from Afghanistan, we had people from a multitude of nations, even though there was that was a small gathering that day of, if I remember correctly, 12 to 15 people. But there were almost that many nations represented there. And these were people that are going to universities in your community that you just build relationship with. So that was my experience with it. So why don't you take that now and unpack it a little bit more and share with our listeners what happens when people come to Destiny Foursquare Church?
I guess the first thing that we're thinking of is to give people a home away from home. International students in Guildford, and Fran's heart is that she'd like to offer a home to them. So the idea of the Sunday lunch, which you came to, is just it's an open house and anyone can come. And although we do target specifically international students, obviously our English friends are welcome to join us as well, and it all creates the community. One of our English friends came along when we first started and said that it's a place to give and receive love. And I took that as a kind of a motto for what we do. So the Sunday lunch is all about being welcoming, inviting people into our home. And then if there's no specific Christian content on a Sunday other than we pray before the meal, and then various conversations may some Christian content. But if people are interested to take it further, then we invite them to come along to a Bible study on a Monday evening. And we usually study one of the Gospels, because the aim of that is for people to get to know Jesus. So that's what we do on a Monday evening.
Okay.
We also, from time to time, have worship and prayer evenings as well. And God is speaking to me at the moment about increasing those, because we found that in worship times, even people who don't know Jesus come along to a worship time and they can sense the presence of God, and God will speak to them in a worship time, even in ways that he doesn't do in the Bible studies. So that's going to be the third kind of strand of what we do. When I was on retreat recently, it occurred to me that those three things are like the three aspects of the Trinity, because on the Sunday we're trying to show people the Father's love. On the Monday we're introducing people to Jesus, and in the worship and prayer times we can allow the Holy Spirit to move in our midst.
I love that. That is beautiful. When you do the family meal time, when you've invited these students, how many on average would be there on a Sunday? What would people expect to find if they came to your place?
The average number would be about 15, like it was the day that you came. But sometimes it can be much fewer, like during school holiday times. Sometimes it can be many more. The most we've ever had is 31, I think.
Okay.
When we had a special party for Chinese New Year, that encouraged the Chinese to come.
I bet it did. And on average, of those 15, would they be from close to an equal number of countries?
That varies. That's varied over the years. So at the moment we are getting a lot of Chinese students. So sometimes it can be a majority of Chinese. But on other times we've had, on one occasion we had 12 people from 10 different countries. And even just recently we had 22 people, and that was from 11 different countries.
Wow.
So it varies a lot, and it's not the same people every week. So although on any one given occasion there may be 15 people, there are probably 15 of a group of 30 or 40 who come fairly regularly, but not everybody can come every week.
Right.
We would allow them to come every week. It's just that their timetables don't allow them to do it.
Yes. It sounds like church in the modern day anyway, doesn't it? You know, I remember even when I was pastoring, I would jokingly refer to, we have our first and third Sunday congregation, and we have our second and fourth Sunday congregation. Just because of people's schedules and lives these days, that's about how it would work out, it would seem like. Now, what are some of the interesting stories and ways that you've seen God working in the students' lives by doing this?
To go back to the worship one again, we had a girl from Iran who was culturally Muslim, not particularly religious, but she'd studied the Quran in Iran. She'd been to Bible studies, and she was quite happy to discuss Christianity, but she seemed to be fairly rigid in what she believed, and she would allow us to have our beliefs, but she wasn't going to be drawn. But then we had a worship evening, which she came to. She didn't really take part, she just sat by herself at the edge of the room, and we were worshipping. But halfway through the meeting, there was suddenly a little gasp from where she was sitting, and what had happened was she'd opened a Bible, and we had a Bible in Farsi that she could use. She'd opened this Farsi Bible and just almost chosen a verse at random, and God had spoken to her through that verse. It was a direct answer to a prayer that she'd been praying to God. And she couldn't believe it. And so she actually got up and found an English Bible to see what it said in English. She found the same verse in English, because the Farsi Bible at that time, it's a very old translation, and it wasn't in modern day Farsi. So she found an English Bible and found, yes, the verse did say what it said, what she thought it said, and God had spoken to her. And that was the beginning of her transformed life. And we ended up some months later baptizing her in the sea, which was a great occasion.
That is amazing. And I would imagine you've seen similar stories like that of these students from all over the world coming, being loved on by you guys. And I tell you, you have a wonderful gift of hospitality. I don't know if it came natural to you, if it was a supernatural gift to you, or it's something you practiced and learned how to do. But whatever it is, you guys have it. And,
yeah, Frans are kind of, I don't know, a natural, I think. Tell them about your cooking and your dad and having people in your home.
Well, I've always really liked meeting people from other countries, and my parents used to tell a story of how when I was 3 years old, we were on a train going somewhere, and there was 2 people in the carriage. In those days, British trains had little individual carriages where 6 people sat together, and these people were 2 black men. I don't know where they were from, but I guess at 3 years old I had probably never seen a black person before, and I started asking them all kinds of questions about where they lived and what did they do and what were they called. And I can remember being about 6 or 7 and being on a train, and it was just after the Hungarian uprising in the late 1950s, and there were people in the carriage speaking Hungarian, and I remember talking to them. I've just always been interested in people that were not British, I suppose, really. And I guess, if I'm honest, I really prefer people who are not British. I like meeting people from other countries, finding out about them, and I like to kind of change the perception that English food is ghastly, because that's to be held around the world that English food is pretty awful. So I like to kind of make them see something different. My father was a chef, so I think I have cooking almost in my genes.
Oh.
It's difficult for me to cook, and it never has been. I was, I think, 6 or 7 years old when I began to talk with the grown-ups around me about what flavours would be nice together.
Wow.
And I can easily do that. And I enjoy cooking a lot.
Now, was your dad a professional chef,
Yeah.
or was that was his profession?
Yeah.
And did you grow up in a home where they were constantly inviting people in and doing this, or was this something
No.
you guys came up with after you got married? And
No, they weren't doing that, and I used to think that was a wasted opportunity for meeting people, but I had, for all kinds of reasons, a rather difficult home life. So we rarely had people at home. Just occasionally people had been and stayed from other countries, but it wasn't something that my mother found easy. And I didn't spend all my time as a child living with my parents, so it wasn't straightforward, really. But we started doing it soon after we got married, didn't we? We started having people in our home. We were in a church one time where they had a model of you invite people to the church for a day or a weekend or come and stay. And I can remember saying to the church administrator, when we get big enough and Paul and I have got a house of our own, can we be one of the people who have these people to stay? Because I wanted just to do that and to share what God had given us.
oh,
Right from when we got married, we said that would be one of the things that we wanted to do in our marriage. And that's pretty much been the way it's worked out. And we've had we've had people stay in our home right from when we first got married. We were a little cautious in the first year. But ever since then, we've had people stay in our home, and we've gradually got more adventurous, from moving from people that we already knew to people that we knew were Christians. And then we were brave enough to have people come who we'd never even met before. And so it's gone on and on and on. And we've had lots of international students live with us. We have 3 living with us at the moment. And that's all kind of tied in with what we do as well.
Actually, we have 4.
We have 4.
You lost count there, Paul.
Sometimes we lose count.
Anna, Kendi, Hossein, and Io.
Oh yeah, Kendi's been away this month, but she's coming back later in the week. Yeah.
Well, it must be a crazy household if you can't remember how many people you have living with you. So you have 4 international students with you right now. I think when I was with you before, you had 2 or 3 living with you even then. So that's a regular thing that you do as well, on top of the Sunday. Yeah. But you guys are really all in on this, aren't you? This really is your life.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the having the students in our house, that started way before we started the church. We've been doing that since we came back from the States in '86. Yeah, nearly 30 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
So how long have you been doing the church?
This is year 8.
Okay.
In its present form.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we previously had a more traditional Foursquare type church. We weren't very good at that. We're better at this.
Yeah. Well, you've probably reached a whole lot more people doing this than you were doing that.
Yeah.
So wisdom is justified by her children. How many people would you say over these 8 years have been part of your community? And by that meaning not just the ones who came one time and fled for their lives, and I doubt very few of those were actually ever there, but the people that came for whatever season that they were living there and able to come, and they formed part of that community, and now they've gone on or returned back home. How many people would you guess?
I would say that's probably around 200. There's been more than 500 been through our house, but like you're saying, some of those are just one-off visits, and but the people who come regularly, I would probably say, would be just under half of that number, so around about the 200 mark.
Okay. And would you have any idea of how many nations that would represent?
50.
50 nations.
Yeah.
So here you have your home. That is, would you consider it a typical middle class British home?
Yep.
You live in a wonderful community. It's just normal. It's just what you see. And out of that, in your own home, doing what you've been doing, inviting people over, inviting the strangers and the alien to come and live with you, to come and dine with you, you have touched 50 nations, well over, and probably, I know you guys, you're that British, it's probably over 200. It's, that British, you guys have really mangled the English language, the way you use it sometimes. You're understating, I believe, humbly understating. But at least, let's say conservatively, these 200 young lives. And these are students that are typically many of them going back to their home nation as doctors, as political leaders, men and women of influence. And they've been touched by you. Have you had any contact with some of them as they've returned back to their countries that you could talk about? I know some of it might be sensitive, that is best left unsaid, but do you have any cases of people that you've maintained contact with?
Well, in fact, one of our students is back in the States now. She came from the States. She went back from us and the evening that she landed in the States, she met the guy who is now her husband. They are now married and have a baby. And we should be seeing them in November in Seattle. And she was really taken with the Bible study evenings, and went back to the States to try to get something similar going in her own youth community in the States.
We had a boy from Italy, and he had grown up in a Protestant family, but really found it really difficult because all his friends were Catholic, and he really liked how we were doing church just because it was based around home and family and extended household and people. And so when he went back, he began to meet with other young people to play football and made relationships with them through doing that. And recently his sister has been a student here for 3 years, and she's come to us, and she wrote in the front of her dissertation how grateful she was to have seen a model of church that she thought appealed to her more than anything she'd seen when she was growing up.
Wow.
Which is quite sad, but on the other hand, it's brought her closer to her faith, and I think that's encouraging.
Yeah, it is. And we were kind of joking before I hit the record button when we were just doing a quick briefing on this, and the way you were describing what you're doing, I said, "Oh, you mean it's kind of like in the New Testament? It's in the Bible." And we laughed at it because that really is how they did church in the day. They didn't. Yeah, and I think we were joking about, well, what do you, I want to make sure I get the name exactly correct. And you said, well, normally we just call it, that's our Sunday lunch, and that's our Sunday meal together, and that's really what the New Testament worship form was. They gathered around the Lord's table, and that wasn't just a little piece of a crumb of a piece of bread and a small little plastic cup with grape juice. It was actually an entire meal.
Yeah.
And one of our good friends and fellow missionary that's living in Budapest, that's what they're doing. They've got this whole. Now I've talked with him about this, and he's really done some thinking on this issue of. You look in Scripture of how many times God encounters people around the meal. And, Abraham, God had a meal with him. Jesus had a meal with his disciples. It's constantly in the Scriptures about the power of sharing life together around a meal. And I just love what I see you guys doing. And I know I've talked at length with one of my daughters, she and her husband are anticipating someday planting something similar to this, being involved, because they just love it. The young people, especially the younger people, and actually I think some of us that are older but have grown weary with spinning all the plates in church, look at it and say, hey, we just want community. That's what it's all about, is the community. So kudos to you guys.
I was thinking about when you said about what do we call our church, I'm not even sure that some of the people who come would know they were coming to a church, because we don't really talk about that a lot. For some of the Muslim students, it's very easy for them to come and have dinner with us on a Sunday, but if they thought they were coming to church, they might not come, and we wouldn't get the opportunity to make the same kind of relationships. We had a girl from Libya who came, and she came regularly for all of the time that she was here, and part of that time was when her parents were involved in the previous government in Libya, and her father was, and they had to be imprisoned when the government fell, and she really didn't have many places she could go. And I think if she had thought it was a church, she might not have come. So we don't really talk a lot about that. They know it's part of, they know we call it destiny, but I'm not sure they know why.
Yeah.
Another time, the family from Afghanistan that you met, the lady was here, and there was some people here who were particularly religious and kept wanting to know where did she go to church, and eventually she said, I am part of Paul and Fran's household, which she has never lived with us, but she knew to say that. It's hard for her to say anything else, really.
That is beautiful, because the New Testament word that is often used for is the household, the oikos, the household of God. This is the oikos, the household of God. And so when they're talking about, well, they're part of your household, you're their mom and dad, their spiritual parents. You're doing exactly what church is supposed to be. What I love about what you guys are doing is people don't attend the church, they participate in church. They are the church in actual and ontological experience, where they are doing exactly what we're supposed to be doing. And so I love it. What are some of your favorite memories and stories of, when you're thinking about these last 8 years? Or are there any particular things that stand out and you say, oh, this one was amazing to see what God did?
Paul talked earlier about the girl from Iran getting baptized.
Yeah.
My favourite memory of that day is that when she was in the water, it was a really crowded beach, and so we were trying to do something public, but at the same time, because of where she's from, we wanted to try and protect her a little bit, because her life could be at risk if somebody else from that country took it into their head to report her.
Yeah.
So while she was being baptized, there had been 2 aeroplanes go over, and they had made a smoke trail in the sky, and it formed a cross above her head. That would be one of my favourite memories.
That's wonderful. That's great. And how about some challenges or any disappointments? Sometimes it's easy for us to talk all about the victories, and you can't love people and care for people to the depth that you guys do without having a few challenges and heartbreaks in there. And because I like to help our listeners who are engaged in very similar things, are there any things that stand out that you say that you can talk about, without betraying anything, and just say, this was a hard thing and this is how we got through it?
Fran always, more than me, finds it hard just to say goodbye to people. And because we have such a transient group, that there's a lot of goodbyes. One year, I remember in particular, it was like almost every week we were saying goodbye to someone we got really close to, and I know Fran found that very difficult. One of the things that I find difficult is when our Chinese students go back, because we haven't really cracked being able to follow up with them when they get back to China, in terms of connecting them with church there, or we can usually keep in touch with them even if it's just by email, but when they go back to China, it's so tough for them, because usually they're going back into an graduate employment situation, and they're expected to work all the hours that God sends, really. They're virtually owned by their companies. And even when there is opportunity for them to connect with other Christians, they literally just don't have time to do it. It's really, really difficult for them to kind of continue in the Christian life as we would think of it in the West when they're back in China.
Yeah, that would be very hard. Well, are there any other tidbits of wisdom that you could share with us for people that are listening that might be interested in putting this to work in their own life?
What did you want to say?
No, I wasn't. I was pulling a face.
Oh, okay.
Tidbits of wisdom.
I thought you were really good to go.
The pressure's on, Fran.
No, I would say don't be afraid of small beginnings, because we just, people look at what we do and they're just amazed and say, I could never do that. And I think, well, yeah, I'm amazed, and I would think I could never do that. I feel the same way, because we didn't set out to do what we do. we just set out to have one or two people stay in our home now and again, invite people round for a meal now and again, but it's just something that over the years has grown and grown, and God's blessed it, and we've seen it become, if you like, a ministry. But it just started with just very small things. So yeah, don't be afraid of just taking one little step, and maybe it'll lead somewhere, maybe it'll lead somewhere different, but it's what was in our heart to do, and so that's what we did it. That would be my thing at the moment. What is it in our heart to do? I find it really hard to, or I did do until I started doing what we're doing now. I always seem to be in conflict between what was in my heart to do and what's the proper way to do church. So now I'm trying to forget the proper way to do and just doing what's in my heart. But what's in someone else's heart will produce a different expression of what is church. So don't be afraid to do what's in your heart.
Very good advice. Fran, any wisdom you want to share? I know you've got plenty.
I don't know it's wisdom, but we had a lady came to us, and she had been a student for I think 2 or 3 years, and she'd hardly known anybody, and she started to come to the Bible study. She'd come for supper and then she'd stay for the Bible study. And one of the last weeks she was there, I took her home and she said, I've realised that I could do what you're doing. I don't even have to give people a meal. I just have to give them a cup of tea and smile at them. And I thought that was rather nice, because she didn't feel pressured to create a church, but she could be hospitable in her home, and she was willing to do that.
Yeah, we were together recently somewhere. Maybe it was when we were at the Foursquare Europe conference, which was there in London with you. And Fran, you and I were talking about something, and there was somebody had made this big highlight of hosting somebody in their home, or being hospitable, being nice to somebody, and you just you didn't say it to anybody in particular, but you just kind of went, well, I thought that was normal. You know, why are we making a spectacular thing out of this when it should just be our normal way of behavior? And it's sad that we have sometimes twisted or misunderstood the nature of the church, the way you guys would be doing what you're doing, having the impact that you're having, and then you still internally struggle with, is this really what a church is supposed to be doing? You know, there's something wrong with our cultural understanding of what it means to be the household of God.
Yeah.
I looked up a few scriptures that seem to be relevant for this. Romans 12:13 says, when God's people are in need, be ready to help them. Always be eager to practice hospitality. Or in the famous one in Hebrews 13:2, don't forget to show hospitality to strangers, for some who have done this have entertained angels without realizing it. And then finally the one in 1 Peter 4:9, cheerfully share your home with those in need, who need a real meal or a place to stay. And I tell you, that is Paul and Fran right there. And what you guys have been doing has been amazing. Just a couple more questions for you. This one's going to be completely off subject, but it's what I find to be something fascinating about you, Fran, is you've got this interest in Amish culture, and you've been doing some advanced research and study, and I think are you in a doctoral program on this, or is it a master's?
I am.
It's a doctoral program on Amish. Tell me a little bit about that.
Tell you a little bit about the Amish, okay? They're in North America and Canada. They were Anabaptists. They fled Europe for religious reasons in the 18th century. And I'm really attracted to the way that they live, and I'm really attracted to the way that they have so totally integrated their faith with their lives. I think I would say that's the main thing I like about studying them and being with them. I've been really privileged to live with a number of Amish families while I've been doing my studies, and there is no separation between their faith and their life, and the way they carry out their daily work. And I really like that, and I would aim to do that as far as I can do it in my own life, because I don't think there shouldn't be all these little compartments. This is work, this is home, this is religion, this is whatever it is.
Yeah.
I think it should all be meshed together as one, and I don't often see that anywhere else.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I know you and I have talked about it at times before in the past, about the whole Amish culture and the beauty that is there, and the depth of life that they live. You know, sometimes we can poke fun at them and talk about how they live without technology. And I tell you, these days anymore, even though I'm talking to you through the internet on a computer, I love that part of the technology. But you know, I think we missed something about the connectedness.
Mm-hmm.
And I did a podcast recently on advice to young leaders, and the very first piece of advice I gave on there was, if you're always connected, you're never present. You know, you see it all the time, and it's easy to pick on the young people that, you know, you go to a mall or a shopping center, and there's a whole gaggle of young people all together, but they're on their phones talking to chatting, you know, SMS or text messaging, whoever's not there, and it's like, you've got all your buddies right here, be with them. Or, you know, you sit down for a meal and always on the phone. It's like, there's something about the Amish. They've got that part right. We could learn from them. Well, hey,
I was talking to an Amish bishop 2 years ago, and he said to me, why would you use a telephone to talk to somebody when you could just walk round and visit with them, sit in the same room and talk to them?
Total different value system, isn't it? Well, Paul and Fran, I ask this of every guest on the podcast. If I had a time machine and I could send you back in time to have a conversation with your 25-year-old self, what advice would you give?
I knew you were going to ask that question, and I was preaching in another church in Guildford on Sunday, and I asked them that question as well.
Oh, wow.
And a couple of them looked at me and said, that is a really good question. And the answer for myself is like Nike say, just do it. I would say, do what's in your heart, take more risks, just do it. Just do it.
Good advice. How about you, Fran?
I think my 25-year-old self had lots of rules and regulations, and some of them I could articulate and some of them I couldn't. But I think that I've been a lot better at communicating with people since I got rid of the rules and regulations and just live by grace. Nice. I would say learn more about grace and live it out.
Good advice. Good advice. Well, Paul and Fran, if people want to reach out, connect with you, maybe pick your brains about doing something like this in their own house, how can they get in touch with you?
The best way for people to contact us would be to email us at destiny.foursquare@ntlworld.com.
Okay.
And we'll respond to your email.
Very good. And we'll include links to that in the show notes as well. Well, Paul and Fran, it has been a joy and a delight to talk with you and have you on the show.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. It's been great.
Well, we're done now. Thanks for listening. This is Jeff Roper reminding you that the mission of God is too grand for mediocrity or average living. You were created for a purpose, and that purpose is found in the mission of God. It's your life. Now go live it.